Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, RegisKillbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and I want to talk about some potential designs for Dr. Boom Mad Genius. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, in the reveal video for the Boomsday Project, the new up-and-coming Hearthstone expansion, they teased a new hero card, much like we saw with Hagatha being teased in the Witchwood reveal. Now we've got a new version of Dr. Boom, a warrior hero card being teased in the Boomsday Project. And you can see that real quickly right here.
I'm not.
And now that you know what I'm talking about, obviously we don't know anything about this card, but I thought it'd be really fun to explore some potential designs for this thing based on what we've seen Blizzard do in the past, some precedents they set with Dr. Boom. I think they do want to respect the tradition of Dr. Boom, so I wanted to take a whack at what some cool designs and gameplay mechanics for this new hero card might be. That said, let's go ahead and jump into them. So for my first design here of Dr. Boom Mad Genius, I wanted to explore the space where pretty clearly Dr. Boom is a pun, or at least a reference to Doctor Doom, the Marvel Comics character, the villain to the Fantastic Four. So I thought it might be fun to play on that and see if we could introduce perhaps a Hearthstone spin on the Fantastic Four themselves into the game. So this hero card would essentially do that. And you can see the battle cry here reads, summon the Bombastic Four for your opponent. Now that's a nice little rhyme, a pun on the word bomb. Now these aren't necessarily going to be bombastic because that is, as an adjective, is not really related to explosions or anything of the sort. But I couldn't pass up the opportunity for the pun and the rhyme there with the Bombastic Four. So clearly summoning minions for your opponent is not typically something you want to do, but as you'll see, since Dr. Boom is a villain and he doesn't want to face off against strong opponents, he wants to face off against weak opponents, these are minions that will essentially backfire for your opponent. They do things that your opponent doesn't want them to do and end up benefiting you as the person playing Dr. Boom. So first up here, we'd have Mr. Bombastic, a 2-mana 1/5 minion that must be targeted by its owner's spells, hero powers, and battle cries. And of course, Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four is really stretchy, and I figured, hey, if he's stretching all over the place, maybe he gets in the way a lot, and he's such a big target that you gotta hit him with your spells and hero powers. So if your opponent, for instance, wants to cast a fireball, suddenly they are forced to fireball their Mr. Bombastic before they can target anything else with their Mr. Bombastic. So as long as it's alive, guess what? It is taking up that space. It has to be targeted. So clearly can really disrupt your opponent's plans and maybe even break combos and stuff, which would be really cool too. Beyond that, we have the Visible Woman. She is not invisible, but in fact, her downside is that she makes her opponent's minions invisible. So as long as Visible Woman is on the board, your opponent's minions are going to have stealth, which means you, the Dr. Boom player's minions, are going to have stealth. So that can really help you protect them and sometimes even make it difficult for your opponent to kill their own Visible Woman, meaning that your minions would remain in stealth against certain classes. So they may have to dedicate some resources to kill this thing beyond just using it to trade in and kill itself, right? They might have to ping it, they might have to use a spell, so on and so forth. Now that said, you might say, well, that means your minions are going to stay in stealth forever. Well, no, we actually do have a plan here with the fourth card, which will eventually enable the opponent to kill their own Visible Woman. So it's not going to last forever. It's just a 1 or 2 turn downside. The third card here is The Bling, based, of course, on The Thing from the Fantastic Four. And that's a Blingtron that I added some nice Thing-style effects to, the little texture there. Pretty proud of that. And in this one, it does have some nice attack because the Thing is big, it's clobbering time, etc. But the death rattle here would, instead of just giving both players a weapon like Blingtron has done, in this case, it would just give you, the Dr. Boom player, a weapon. Because remember, this is summoning for your opponent. That means when it dies, it's giving you a weapon. And because of Robot Torch there, the fourth card of the Fantastic or Bombastic 4 in this case, and they do summon in this order positionally on the board, which is really important. As you'll see, the Robot Torch, not the Human Torch, at the end of the turn deals 1 damage to adjacent minions. So first off, it's gonna kill the Bling at the end of the opponent's turn unless they play something in the middle, which they could. They still have some control there. But eventually it would kill the Bling, and if they want to kill their own Visible Woman without dedicating further resources, they might want to kill the Bling to get it out of the way so that the Robot Torch will slide over and then kill the Visible Woman, because it's only for adjacent minions, not all minions. So it creates this kind of cool opportunity for the opponent to either keep the Bling around perhaps and get that attack and deny you the weapon. If you don't have minions that are stealthed and scary, if you do have stealth scary minions, they might have to work in a way to ensure that they can kill their Visible Woman sooner so that they can deal with your stuff. And the Robot Torch is very difficult for your opponent to kill because it's 0/5. They can't trade it in. It's pretty much this permanent effect that's dealing 1 damage all the time, disrupting their board and causing problems outside of some sort of universal removal or, single target that they dedicate to killing it. So in all 4 cases, annoying, frustrating, awkward minions to deal with. You are technically giving your opponent some stats and some attacks, so there's a small risk. But most of the time, these will benefit you in some pretty interesting ways and create lots of friction and strategy points for a really cool back and forth that I think would be super duper fun, fantastic, and thematically very appropriate. Now, you might wonder what the hero power for this version of Dr. Boom Mad Genius would be. And it, it is Silver Nerfer. Of course, a play on words for Silver Surfer. But in this scenario, you'd spend 2 mana, and it would increase the cost of 3 random cards in your opponent's, there's a typo there, in your opponent's hand by 1. Please forgive my typo, I'm too lazy to go back and fix it. So essentially, it'd be this sort of reverse Emperor Thaurissan. It wouldn't affect their whole hand, only 3 random cards, because that's how Blizzard nerfs everything, right? They just increase a few cards' mana cost by 1, and they call it a day. The Silver Nerfer hero power would do the same thing. Now, that is a pretty powerful hero power, I think. That might be a slight bit unbalanced. I'm not as worried about final design as like theme and creativity, so maybe it's 2 cards. I don't think it could be only 1 card, because then you'd be spending 2 mana to only disrupt your opponent by 1. In this case, you spend 2 to disrupt your opponent by 3, which feels like it's a good balance, a reward without being totally crazy or without being totally fair. And I like Silver Nerfer here because that can, of course, break combos, make things really difficult for your opponent depending on the cards it hits. And as you repeat it turn over turn, you might nerf 1 card 3 or 4 times, making it unplayable. If it started at 9 mana or 8 mana, you put it to 11, you might completely kill a card, which could be really cool, which means your opponent has to play in a strategic way where they're like, man, I need to play my 9 mana card right now. If it gets nerfed again, I may not get to play it, or so on and so forth. So really cool strategic element there as well. All told, I think this would be a really fun way to play the game. I don't know if it's perfectly balanced. Maybe not. Maybe there's too many problems. Maybe there's too much upside. But you're spending 7 mana and not like getting a minion or clearing the board. So it is a bit of a slow, passive sort of play. So I think it needs to have some problems and friction created for it to be good enough and fast enough to make sense. In control matchups, I think this would really thrive. And it would be so much fun and such a cool way thematically to address the fact that Dr. Doom is a play on words for Dr. I just said it backwards. That Dr. Boom is a play on words for Dr. Doom. That's really tough to keep track of. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. This was really fun to design. So now let's jump into my next card. So that last card was like super complex and something Blizzard would probably never do. Tons of fun, really neat design. This one is way simpler, and I think this is exactly the sort of thing that Blizzard would do. This card's much more likely to be the simplicity and nostalgic level that Blizzard wants to achieve with a new Dr. Boom. It references the old card. It's not too crazy. And you'll see what I mean as we get into it here. So this is also 7 mana. Spoiler alert, all of these are going to be 7 mana. The battle cry for this version reads, summon a boom bot for each enemy minion. So a bit like Spreading Plague, for instance. That's a 6 mana card. But boom bots, of course, don't have taunt. They are 1/1s, in case you forgot what a boom bot looks like. It looks like this. So pulling that back from wild format into The Boomsday Project, again, would be really fun. And this would be cool because it's, in some ways better than something like Spreading Plague, because these could do tons of damage. They could hit your opponent's face a few times and do 12 damage. If your opponent had 7 minions, that would be a total of 28 potential damage on board from your boombots, not counting, of course, their own attack value. But it could also be completely useless sometimes. Your opponent could just overwhelm you and kill you and totally ignore the boombots. So you'd have to find the right sort of board state and game state to make this a reasonably good play, but they're still going to cause some problems and make some trades and do some cool stuff, not to mention just having lots of minions summoned is a good play, generally speaking. So I like the idea of that. Now, the hero power for this one, equally simple, and that's by design. It's obviously not because I'm lazy. You saw the previous card. It's because I think this is exactly what Blizzard would do. So for the hero power, you just summon a Boombot. Now, that's arguably a fairly weak hero power compared to some of the hero cards we've seen before. For instance, Blood Reaver Gul'dan dealing 3 and healing 3, that's a huge swing. A Boombot is, I think, actually worth roughly 2 mana, even though they cost 1 technically according to the card. The 1/1 stat line plus that really positive death rattle effect is actually rather strong. I mean, if you compare it to, Paladin standard hero power, you get the same body, but you get an awesome death rattle on top of that takes trades and creates problems and does damage. And eventually, if you do that turn after turn after turn, it's going to add up to lots of damage and lots of value. So arguably, you could say, hey, summon 2 Boombots. I think that would probably be too good, because if you think about how oppressive, for instance, a Baku Paladin hero power is right now, imagine if they were also dealing 1 to 4 damage every time they died. That would be insane. Maybe you summon a 2/2 Boombot. Maybe that's a little more balanced. Again, I'm not trying to answer those questions exactly, but I think this is exactly what Blizzard would be likely to do with a card like this. Reference Dr. Boom. It's playable, probably. It's neat. It's cool. Nothing too crazy. Which to me makes it a little boring. I wouldn't like seeing this compared to the other cards, but I think we're more likely to see something like this for the actual Dr. Boom Mad Genius. So moving on to my third design here. This one is based on the World of Warcraft character, Dr. Boom, which, if you didn't know, he is actually in World of Warcraft, unlike a lot of Hearthstone characters. And in the game, I guess, I looked this up. I don't remember this. I probably encountered this a long, long time ago. But in the game, he gives your character some bombs, which you then have to throw at him to kill him, etc. But I liked this idea of giving bombs to your opponent. That seems like something a mad genius would do. The evil villainous Dr. Boom would throw bombs at your opponent. So the battle cry here is give your opponent 5 mega bombs. And of course, I wanted to use some exaggerated language because that's exactly how Blizzard does the tongue-in-cheek warning type text that was on Dr. Boom back in the day. And a mega bomb, because I know you're curious and it took me forever to click through that, would be a 4 mana spell. Remember, you give your opponent 5 of these. Now, of course, if they don't have a room in their hand, they would only get the number of cards available. So if they had 2 spots, they'd only get 2 mega bombs. So you'd probably want to play this when they had at least 5 open spots in their hand. Ideally 5, because then you'd get the max mega bombs, but also burn a card when you pass the turn back to them. So there's a neat little kind of mill bonus effect happening here. But a mega bomb is a spell that is essentially a ticking time bomb that sits in your opponent's hand. And after 3 turns of it being in their hand, now that means 3 of their own turns, not 3 overall turns. So after it's been in their hand 3 times, when they're able to play it, it would explode, dealing 10 damage to them. So the idea is you're creating this really awkward spot for your opponent where they get 5 mega bombs. That means if they don't want any of them to blow off by the end of their 3rd turn, they have to cast 2 the first turn. Well, in any order, they have to cast 2 and then 1 mega bomb, right? Because otherwise, if you get to that 3rd turn, you have a couple left, you're going to take 20, 30 damage, for instance. So if they want to play a 6 mana card right away and play 1 mega bomb, they can. They could do that. And then they'd have 4 remaining. They'd still have plenty of time to get rid of them, but they'd only have 2 spare mana each of the next 2 turns. So it'd be pretty punishing. Alternatively, you didn't do much as the warrior player when you played Dr. Boom here. You kind of passed on the board. You didn't develop anything likely. Even if it's turn 10, you may be only hero powered or played a small minion, so they might have a little bit of time and decide to play 2 Mega Bombs right away and bank some additional mana for a future turn. If they're a druid and they have 60 health, they might say, screw it, I don't care, I'll take 30 damage off the Mega Bombs, I don't really care. So there are all these game states and decisions where they have to decide how to spend their mana. You know, if it's an aggro deck, they'll probably say screw it and kill you because you just passed a turn. They don't care about the Mega Bombs. They just want to kill you, and they're going to play minions and deal damage. So there are these neat game states and board states. A lot of decisions have to be made. You have to think ahead by a few turns. How do I need to spend my mana? How do I need to address stuff? As the Dr. Boom player, you're creating all this friction, and you can try to line up sneaky things where you play like a really big threat on the 3rd turn when you know your opponent is probably going to need to spend 8 mana to get rid of their Mega Bombs, and then they can't polymorph because you played your Ysera that turn or whatever it might be. I love the back and forth there. So on top of that, you're probably wondering what the hero power is, and that is Bombs Away, which reads, give your opponent a regular bomb, not a Mega Bomb, just a regular bomb. And that would be a 3 mana spell that would operate the exact same way. It would have a 3-turn timer, but it would only deal 5 damage to the opposing hero. So they would have the same sort of dilemma, and theoretically, you could Dr. Boom Mad Genius and use your hero power Bombs Away on the same turn for 9 mana and give your opponent 6 total bombs. That would be a little bit more awkward to use. They could still play all of them and take 0 damage, but they wouldn't have much spare mana to work with beyond that. And this just creates this repeatable threat where they're always sort of spending 3 mana for your 2 mana commitment. So you start to gain a little bit of mana efficiency over your opponent, or again, they can choose to take the damage, but all those decisions have to be made. There's also this cool mill strategy where you're giving your opponent potentially 6 cards in a single turn trying to burn some of their resources. So I like this across the board and how it operates. Now, are the damage numbers right? Are the mana numbers right? I don't know. Obviously, you'd have to play test this a million times to see how well it would work. Maybe it's an 8 damage instead of 10 damage for the Mega Bomb. Maybe they're 3 mana and deal 10 damage. I don't know the answers there. It's hard to figure that stuff out, but I like the idea, and the theme of this, I think, is really, really cool. So I would like to see this version of Dr. Boom Mad Genius quite a bit, I think. So up next here, I have another card that I would say is a little bit more grounded in the original version of Dr. Boom, and probably is one that Blizzard would be more likely to design something similar to this. And for this Dr. Boom Mad Genius, the battle cry reads, explode all minions. And when I say explode, I actually mean destroy. In this instance, the minions would be killed. And then the explosion part of that means that they would deal 1 to 4 damage to a random enemy. Now, what that means, of course, is that if every minion is exploded simultaneously, outside of the case of like death rattles, that this damage would be dealt to each opposing hero. So there are 2 pretty neat interactions there right away. If you are playing an aggro deck, for instance, and you are looking for a burst damage finisher, this could almost be sort of like a Bloodlust, for instance, where you have 4 or 5 minions on board, you attack with them, and then you explode all the minions, and each of those minions does, on average, essentially 2.5 damage to the opposing hero, something like Bloodlust. So you get all this extra potential damage burst for 7 mana. Alternatively, if you're playing this in a control deck, you could wipe your opponent's board completely. Use it like a Twisting Nether, for instance, but it's a Twisting Nether where you potentially take a lot of damage to the face. Now, as a warrior, that may not be a problem. That's probably a sacrifice that you're happy to make because you just want to be sure that you can clear the board. So some really neat interactions there right off the bat. Also, sometimes, you know, you might go even 4 for 4 and both heroes take a little bit of damage. Maybe that's relevant in some specific matchup. But I like the idea that you have to decide when to play this, because you got to manage the risk, you got to manage the reward, both from that deck building standpoint, but also from a game state standpoint as well. Now, moving beyond that, the hero power falls in line here a little bit, and this would be called Warning because of that text, of course, on the old version of Dr. Boom. Warning, bots may explode or something like that. And this would be a passive hero power. And for this one, all friendly minions, when they die, whether they're removed or just die via trade, would explode as well, dealing 1 to 4 damage to a random enemy. So it's essentially taking that Boom Bot Death Rattle and applying it to any minion that you play. Now, in this case, of course, these could hit other minions for removal, could hit your opponent's face. However, Boom Bots work the same way here. Now, I think this is a pretty powerful hero power if you're in a minion-based deck. But the thing is, if you're playing this in like an aggro deck for warrior and you're trying to use the battle cry as a burst damage finisher, remember that you're going to be destroying all of your minions. So you're going to have to reload the board pretty substantially if you want your passive hero power to take effect and be powerful. So there's this kind of like, I'm going all in, trying to kill my opponent. Can I reload to get value out of this hero power? I'm not sure. But alternatively, if you're playing this in a control deck, you may not have as many minions, but nonetheless, all of your minions serve this extra dual purpose. So any taunt you play, maybe it doesn't only trade into the minions that hit it, but it also kills something off to the side, really disrupting your opponent's attack plan or pattern, or removing something from the board, which of course could be great in a control warrior deck. I also kind of like the idea of this with whirlwinds. You know, if you have a lot of small minions, somehow you could whirlwind them to do tons of damage. So there's different ways warrior certainly can synergize with this, but also the fact that it applies across archetypes, I think, is really cool too. So this might be a pretty neat one to see, and it's not totally out of the realm of possibility for Blizzard as far as I'm concerned. So finally, I have one last card here, and I'm just going to warn you now, this one's pretty crazy, and I have no idea if it's balanced or if it makes any sense, but I wanted to try something cool and different in regards to an alternate win condition in Hearthstone. And by alternate win condition, I mean an instance in which you don't win via dealing damage to your opponent's face. So things like Uther with his hero power, that's an alternate win condition. And so far, I guess really the only one we've seen in Hearthstone. Fatigue is sort of an alternate way to win, but that still operates via damage to the face. So anyway, long story short, this version of Dr. Boom summons a Doom bot. So again, harkening back perhaps to the Fantastic Four a little bit here. And the text is very reminiscent of the Dr. Boom of old, but this bot will explode. It's not just may explode like the old text. And I'm sure you're really curious what a Doombot is. Well, this is a Doombot. It's a 7 mana, 77/77. Clearly, Dr. Boom loves 7s. And this is a minion that will be summoned, but it can't attack and it can't be silenced. So it basically can never attack. Even if you silence it, it still can't be attacked. But you also can't silence this extra effect off of it either, which is that it explodes after 7 turns, killing your opponent. So it's going to explode and it's going to win you the game if it stays alive. Now, it can't be silenced and it can't deal damage, but it still can be killed. It can be removed from the board. It can be transformed as well. So there are a lot of decks that could answer this thing really efficiently and easily and quickly, right? So a Polymorph, a Hex, a Vile Spine Slayer, all of those things can deal with the Doombot pretty quickly and without any problem. There are other decks, on the other hand, though, that maybe don't have an answer to this at all. Some sort of aggro deck might not be able to ever kill this because they just don't have some sort of single target removal card. And if you start to stabilize against that aggro deck and you play your Dr. Boom Mad Genius, it's going to make sure that you end the game pretty quickly because they just don't ever answer this thing. You play a wall of taunts, you stay alive for 7 turns, and you win. And in this case, specifically with these turns, these are not like friendly or enemy turns. These are both. So you play the Doombot, you pass your turn, that's 1. Your opponent gets a turn, that's 2. You get a turn, that's 3. And what that means is essentially that your opponent gets 3 total turns to address this thing. So even if they don't have the Polymorph, the Hex right away, they can draw cards, they can look for crazy answers, they can try to end the game because you basically took a pass on 7 mana. So they might just try to race you and kill you if they don't have an answer right away because you kind of just played a minion that doesn't do anything. You gain 5 armor only for 7 mana. That's really slow. So maybe they try to take advantage of that and push the game to where they can kill you before this thing ends it, or they just try to draw a ton of cards to make sure they find their single target removal. And you might say, well, Regis, that's crazy. That's going to make it so hard for your opponent. Like, they have to always have the removal. And that's true, but remember that if this becomes a part of the meta, if this were a thing that you saw often, you would know, oh, I'm playing Warrior. I need to save an answer for the Doombot. I'm going to keep that polymorph in my mulligan. I'm going to save it until he plays the Doombot. So there are certainly opportunities to end this thing's life, right? Decks are going to have it. It's going to die a lot. Now, that said, that's where the hero power comes in. The hero power for this one would be a 10 mana hero power that says summon a Doombot. So again, that's a terrible play, right? You never want to do that. It's a complete pass for 10 mana. It doesn't do anything. It's just completely passive. Your opponent can run over you. But if you get into this like end game state against a control deck, this gives you this impending doom type of win condition, right? It's almost like Ren in a way, where we've seen with Ren, once your opponent starts building towards that Ren, if you don't have the right answer, they're just eventually going to destroy your deck and probably put themselves in a position to win. This would do the same thing. If you're playing like a control mage Jaina deck, and they aren't playing any minions, they're just kind of passing every turn, looking for the occasional water elemental, and you summon a 77/77 minion, like they're going to polymorph the first one, they're going to polymorph the second one, right? But eventually they're going to run out of single target removal, and they have to end the game, or you're going to do it for them, because they're not applying enough pressure to kill you, and they're not resolving your Doombot. So it gives you these neat interactions where you can put the game in a terminal state in a control versus control environment. And you're sacrificing a lot. Remember, you lose your armor up hero power. This is your only hero power. You don't get to do anything else. So it wouldn't always be good, and it might be a last resort type of scenario where you bleed out all the resources and you play this, but it's just this neat end game state that we don't currently get in Hearthstone otherwise. Is it too powerful? Maybe. I don't know. Does it need to be a 10 mana card? Maybe. Is it too weak? Probably. I think so. I think this is actually kind of a bad card. I don't really think this would be played all that often, because you're just sacrificing so much tempo for this sort of cheesy way to end the game that backfires more often than not. So I don't actually think this is good, to be honest, but I think it'd be fun and cool and neat. Does it need some tweaks to be fair or balanced? Yeah, probably. I don't know. I haven't thought about every game state or scenario that might make this a bad idea. Maybe there's a stealth card, for instance, or something that prevents this from dying, but then there's always twisting nethers and stuff too, and brawls and universal removal that still deal with things. So who knows? I'm not trying to answer all those questions. I just wanted to explore the idea of a hilariously large minion first and foremost, but then also these sort of alternate win conditions that we don't often see in Hearthstone, and I thought this would be kind of a maniacal, evil genius sort of thing to do, so it seemed to fit the theme quite nicely. And there you go. Those are my 5 Dr. Boom Mad Genius custom cards. Let me know what you think. I know there's a couple crazy wonky ones here, a couple simple ones. The likelihood that Blizzard actually lands on anything like this, of course, is incredibly minuscule. This is more about just exploring the cool kinds of things they could do, thinking back to Dr. Boom of old and seeing how you can connect those pieces together. So who knows? They're probably just going to toss in something like Magnetic and have some really lame thing, and that'll be it. I hope, though, they go for something cool and complex and awesome and game-changing that just completely changes the way we think about Hearthstone. That's, of course, what I want to see for these big namesake cards like this. Hagatha, I thought, was kind of halfway there. She didn't really seem to fit the theme of the Witchwood much. There was no, like, decay or hex tile stuff, or no voodoo aspect to her cards. So that was disappointing. As far as the mechanic, it's okay. It's neat. But I hope Dr. Boom gets a little closer to really capturing what the Boomsday Project is all about. So we'll have to see. So, of course, I'm curious about your thoughts. Tell me what I got wrong. Tell me why something is incredibly overpowered and I forgot some insane interaction. I'm sure that will happen. And you guys are always good about sharing that stuff, so I can't wait to see. But until then, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.